Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've ever tried to teach someone a new skill, or maybe tried to learn a totally complex topic yourself and just felt completely lost, you know that teaching and learning can sometimes feel like total chaos. But what if there was an actual blueprint for it? Well, there is. Today, we're exploring the work of Robert Gagne. He was a prominent American educational psychologist who's widely considered the absolute architect of modern instructional design. First introduced back in 1965, his theories literally bring order to the chaos of teaching by providing us with a structural blueprint for how information is processed and retained.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to build this concept from the ground up today, exactly like you would a house. We'll start with the foundation, climb the 8-step ladder of learning types, explore the completed rooms of human capabilities, see the blueprint in action, and finally, open the doors to real-world applications.
Section 1. The Foundation, Blending Behaviorism and Cognitivism. To really appreciate Gagne, you have to understand his unique approach. Back in the day, educational psychology was pretty strictly divided. You had the behaviorists, who focused only on observable actions and rewards, and then the cognitivists, who only cared about the invisible processes happening inside the mind. Gagne brilliantly blended the two. He defined learning like this. Learning is a change in the behavior of an individual that is retained and that makes possible a corresponding change in his or her behavior in a particular situation. The huge takeaway here is that for Gagne, learning isn't just some fleeting aha moment inside your brain. It has to be an observable, retained change in behavior. If you can't actually demonstrate it later in a specific situation, well, you haven't truly learned it.
Which brings us to his core concept, the hierarchy of learning. This is a system that classifies different types of learning strictly by their complexity. And the key thing to remember is that higher-order cognitive processes are built entirely upon a foundation of lower-level behavioral skills. Think of it exactly like constructing a building. You simply cannot put the roof on a building without pouring the concrete foundation first. You can't learn advanced problem-solving if you haven't mastered the basic behavioral responses sitting right beneath it.
Section 2. The 8-step ladder, ascending to complex cognition. Time to start the climb.
Gagne identified 8 basic varieties of learning, and he arranged them in a strict hierarchical order. We're starting at the very bottom. First up is signal learning. This is the absolute base level. It's an involuntary, generalized, and often emotional response to a signal. So yes, ironically enough, our highly complex human learning journey starts right alongside Ivan Pavlov's drooling dogs. It's an involuntary reflex. But as we take one step up to stimulus response learning, things change. Notice the difference. This step is voluntary. Based on B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, this is where we learn to make a precise response to a specific stimulus because we're either rewarded or punished for it. It's mechanical, sure, but it's a choice.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how these intermediate links form. Once we have those basic stimulus response behaviors down, we move to chaining. This is where we link 2 or more basic physical behaviors together in a sequence, like riding a bicycle. It's a complex chain of physical responses. Next is verbal association. Think of this as chaining, but with language. It's creating verbal links, like a toddler pointing and proudly saying, "Red ball." Then, as we gather all these physical chains and verbal links, we must master multiple discrimination. That's the ability to distinguish between very similar stimuli, so we don't get confused. Basically, learning to tell things apart to avoid interference in our brain.
All right, let's pick up the pace a bit because step 6 is a big jump. Concept learning. We are now firmly in higher-level internal cognitive processing. Instead of just distinguishing things, we're grouping them. We provide a common response to an entire class of stimuli. We start simple with concrete concepts, like noticing that coins and wheels share the concept of being circular. But then we advance to abstract concepts. Think about the concept of cousins or justice. You can't arrive at the concept of a cousin just by physically observing a bunch of them. You have to mentally classify their relationship.
Got concepts down? Great, because now we step up to rule learning. This is where we relate 2 or more concepts together to actually navigate the world around us. For example, at 100 degrees Celsius, water will boil. By connecting the concept of temperature and the concept of a boiling point, the learner now has a solid rule that applies to the physical world. They can predict outcomes in brand new situations.
And boom, we have reached the peak of the ladder. Step 8, problem solving. This is the absolute highest cognitive level in Gagne's hierarchy. This requires true, deep internal thinking. You aren't just memorizing a rule anymore, you're combining multiple lower-order rules to invent a brand new, complex procedure to achieve a goal. For instance, if you're asked to prove that air has pressure, you have to mentally combine rules you've already learned about weight, direction, and water columns to solve the problem. Look at that. We've made it from involuntary dog reflexes all the way to complex scientific reasoning.
Section 3. The completed rooms, 5 outcomes of learning. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when our building is finished. Gagne proposed that climbing that ladder develops human capabilities across 5 specific domains. These are the completed rooms of our house. Verbal information is your declarative knowledge, recalling facts or names. Intellectual skills are the how-tos, like working out fractions. Cognitive strategies are how we govern our own internal thinking, like using inductive reasoning to figure out a magnet. Motor skills are those smooth physical sequences, like fastening a button or playing the guitar. And finally, attitudes, the internal states that affect our personal choices, like whether you actually want to read a book. Every single learning task you can think of falls into one of these incredibly relatable rooms. Section 4. The Blueprint in Action, 9 Events of Instruction. So we know how the learner processes information internally, but what must the teacher do externally? To make learning truly stick, Gagne mapped out a foolproof 9-step checklist for instructional design. First, gain attention. Then, inform the learner of the objectives. Stimulate recall of prior knowledge. Present the stimulus. Provide guidance. Elicit performance. Provide immediate feedback. Assess that performance. And finally, enhance retention by showing real-world generalizations. It's rapid fire, but it works. Skip a step, and the whole building might wobble.
Section 5. Opening the doors. Educational implications.
So, why does all this structural theory actually matter in a modern classroom or training module? Because it demands meticulous reverse engineering. So the crucial point is that teachers must first identify the final behavior they want to see, and then figure out exactly what prerequisite skills are needed to get there. They have to break complex tasks down into bite-sized component skills. You simply cannot teach higher learning if the foundational skills are missing. If a student is failing at problem solving, it is highly likely they're just missing a basic concept or rule lower down on the ladder.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. Are you building your learning on a solid foundation, or are you skipping steps? The next time you struggle to learn a new subject, or maybe master a new hobby, stop and analyze your own hierarchy. What prerequisite skills are you missing? Are you trying to solve complex problems before you've even mastered the basic concepts? Remember Robert Gagne's blueprint. Every complex achievement is built upon a sturdy, simple foundation. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and happy building.